a book comes out, if it's successful, a couple of things can happen. That book can make it on lists, like the New York Times bestsellers or Goodreads Listopia. It can win awards, like the Booker, the Hugo, or the Pulitzer. Or it can be translated into other languages, reprinted for audiences all over the world. There are some famous examples of this. The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho was originally published in Portuguese. Tolstoy's Anna Karenina was, of course, authored in Russian. But this opens up a whole new room for debate, and not just in regard to authorship. This act of translation, it's never perfect. It can't be. That's just not how language works. Sometimes aspects of the original text don't work in a new language. Sometimes things just fall flat. Other times, a translator might take creative liberties, embellish things, or make minor changes out of preference. In all of this, there's change. There's a disconnect between pieces. A translation is never a true, meticulous, word-by-word reprint of the original. Jessica Shafer is a junior here at UNCW, and she's been ruminating on this quandary. Her paper, The Languages of Caramelo and Puerto Cuento, examines Sandra Cisneros' bilingual epic and its Spanish language translation. In it, she wonders, what is lost when a novel is translated? What is potentially gained? How is a text even further complicated by the inclusion of multilingual hybrids like Spanglish or Español? And what effect does this code switching have in Cisneros' writing? From Audacious Media and the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, this is the Relevate Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Charles Wright. Let's begin, shall we? Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Super happy you're here.
I am happy to be here.
Your paper demonstrates a really compelling fusion of literary and cultural studies and sociolinguistics. By examining both subtle and blatant differences between the English and the Spanish versions of Cisneros' novel, you illuminate a really palpable fracture between translations. Why do you think that it's important to look at the relationship between an original text and its translated versions?
Because they can tell different stories. You know, when you look specifically at Puerto Cuento and Caramelo, which are the same book that Cisneros wrote, you get different things from it when you look at it from different perspectives. And the perspective of language ultimately shapes how we view not only the world, but everything else. So I think it's important to look at something from every angle, and one of those angles is through the lens of language.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that it's important. Like, it opens up the concept of not just doing this with books, and it sort of draws attention to the idea of we exist in a country where
right.
English is not necessarily it may be the dominant language written-wise, but it is not. Like, United States is an interesting case where we don't have an official language because we're true. A melting pot. We have right. so many different languages that exist, and for many people that live in America, they live in existence where half of their lives is in English and half of their lives is in a different language. Mm-hmm. And examining a book in this way opens up the idea to examining life this way.
Yeah.
Readers aren't just reading in a bilingual way, they're living in a bilingual way. Mm-hmm. And I think that your paper really gets at the importance of looking at life this way.
Yeah.
Your paper spends a good amount of time looking at the differences between Spanglish and Español, both of which are used throughout the different versions of the novel. Can you clarify what these differences are?
Yeah. So this was one of my favorite things to study and look at. It was just really interesting to me. The difference is from which language background you are approaching bilingualism. So in Spanglish, you're coming from English perspective and learning or understanding Spanish from that perspective. With Español, you are coming from Spanish and learning English or looking at English from a Spanish perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had never heard of Español because I come from an English background. So I've heard Spanglish used all the time, but I've never heard of it being looked at from the other way. I thought that was really interesting. In looking at the two versions of this novel, a blurring of lines between languages appears. They're not fully monolingual, not fully bilingual, nor are they perfectly Spanglish or Español. What do you make of Cisneros' unusual use of language in these two works?
You know, I just think that it is really a work of art when it comes to her use of language in this novel, these novels. It's just beautiful, and I make a point in my paper to say, like, she's writing in her native language of Espanol or Spanglish. It's not about making a point so much as it is about being honest to herself and to her voice and to an audience of people who come from that perspective as well. Yeah,
it feels very authentic. Like
yes.
It doesn't feel like a Disney Channel version of representation. It feels like, oh, this is 100%, realistic.
100%.
What led you to start looking deeper into this specific aspect of the novel?
Well, I've always been fascinated by language. And so given the opportunity, I read this book for my Intro to Literary Studies class and immediately was drawn to this feature of this awkward feeling, for me at least, stumbling through English and Spanish at the same time. And
it's almost like you yourself had an immigrant experience.
Right, 100%, 100%. And so looking at it from this, wall, and you're not quite here and you're not quite there, you're just kind of on top of the wall and just trying to balance these ideas in your head, I just thought it was fascinating and immediately wanted to explore it. And it was difficult because I'm not a native Spanish speaker. Right. But I received a lot of support from my professor who does speak Spanish and other professors who do, and it was great.
Yeah, it's nice to have those resources.
Yes.
Did anything surprise you while you were writing this paper?
Yeah, I was surprised by the amount of perspectives that I just blatantly disagreed with. I don't usually come across ideas and stuff that I'm not willing to, give a chance or look at the perspectives. But when it came to this idea of Caramelo Puro Cuento being this big statement piece on language, I just couldn't agree. So I found so many people saying that this was Cisneros trying to make a point or make English readers uncomfortable, or her writing was bad because of it or good because of it. And I really just think it's her writing, So I was surprised by the amount of people who didn't share that perspective with me. But of course, that's a part of research. You find different opinions that you don't agree with and prove them wrong or right.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That we were having a discussion in a teaching philosophy class, a pedagogy class that I'm taking, and we were sort of talking about a very similar aspect in regards to anti-racist teaching. And the idea, one student was saying that the inclusion of all of this anti-racist rhetoric actually can have the effect of making white students, especially in like a predominantly white classroom, which you'll find a lot, especially in the North, that you'll find that it'll like offend them. The students can potentially feel offended because they then feel uncomfortable. And one student was saying that that's the point. The point is to make those white students feel uncomfortable. But I disagreed with that. I was like, no, it's not the point. We're never trying to offend anyone as in teaching in the classrooms. But then also I agree. I don't think that Cisneros was trying to offend or alienate anyone. It's just to show in both of these situations the reality of life. It's like, you're going to walk into a room at one point and you are not going to be, and this has nothing to do with skin color or ethnicity, you're going to be a minority in some way. Like when I walk into a doctor's office, I'm not a doctor. So like it's a foreign experience when you walk into somewhere where you are not the same as everybody else. And when literature can do that, and when in a classroom you can make that same thing, it's just healthy growth.
Exactly. And that's another reason I was so fascinated, was exploring that discomfort. The purpose is never to make anyone uncomfortable, but when you notice that discomfort in yourself, that's you noticing something that's new to you, and you just explore that. In the same way that swimming for the first time can be uncomfortable, or riding a bike for the first time can be uncomfortable because it's new and it's maybe a little scary, but that just means you need to look at it more and explore it more.
Yeah, no, that's really beautifully put. I love that. Why do you think that this kind of research, specifically the blending of linguistics and cultural studies, is essential?
That is a tough question, because it is very much I put them together out of my own interest. And you sent me that question. I was like, wow, why is it essential? Why is this more than just something that I'm interested in? And, it came down to like what I said at the beginning. I think it's important to explore things from all perspectives, from all angles. And you can't do that unless you look at it from different languages as well. For example, I'm taking Hispanic linguistics this semester, and I've taken a linguistics course already. And so I have kind of a basic understanding of linguistics, but it just, again, approaching it from this new angle of Spanish language, it opens up this whole new world of linguistics for me in a sense of like, we have the word language, and that encapsulates a lot of different things for us. While in Spanish, there is lenguaje and lengua. And lenguaje is more like the concept of what builds a language, these ideas, pragmatics and such. And lengua is just the literal language. It's Spanish, it's English, it's French, it's whatever. And so making these distinctions and discovering these distinctions and having words for them too is just so fascinating and wonderful.
What led you to pursue a degree in the humanities yourself?
I really would just say life and interest, in the same way that I was led to research language in this novel. It was because it interested me and I was drawn to it. I came to UNCW as a film major. I was so sure I was going to write music for films, and that was going to be my life, and I was going to move out to Los Angeles. And it just, as I got further down that line and as I started taking more English classes, it just became evidently clear to me that one of those things was a lot more interesting to me than the other. And I just started following that path, and now I'm here and I'm in my spring semester, my junior year, and it's crazy. And I've loved a lot of what I've learned, and I've loved the people that I've met along the way. And it's just kind of where life's led me. And yeah.
What do you want to do with your degree in the future?
That's an excellent question. I've probably spent the most time pondering this question, not even...
All English majors do.
Yeah. I tell people I'm an English major, and they're like, oh, so you'll be a teacher. And I'm like, I don't know about that. That's literally, that question is the catalyst for this podcast. Right.
Is because I'm so tired of when I tell someone that I'm an English major, and specifically that I'm getting a graduate degree in English.
Right.
They're like, oh, so are you going to be a professor?
Yeah,
are you going to be a teacher? I'm like, there's so many things that you can do. It's like, I wish that people understood that you can do so many things with an English degree.
Right. Oh, the dreaded, I speak English. I grew up speaking English. I don't need a degree in that. If you only knew just how much there is to explore. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to the humanities, to this English degree, was the never-ending options of opportunity that are available to me through this. And I've jumped around with a lot of ideas with what I want to do, whether I stick with doing research and writing like I've did with this paper, or maybe go into editing and publishing, or, maybe I do end up in education. I come from a family of educators, and it could be anything. And I think that's the beauty of it, is in the same way that life kind of led me down this road to the humanities and English, I think it'll lead me down the road to something to do in the future that I absolutely love.
Yeah, and you're a junior. You still got time.
Yeah, I have plenty of time.
A year and a half or a year. You got a year to figure it out. What gives you hope right now for the future of the humanities? Because right now we're battling this internal problem of relevance. And I was wondering, what do you see around you here at the school, out in the world, that makes you feel like it's going to be okay?
I love that question. I think that in the world that we live in, and through all of time and history, we've needed hope, and it's what drives us. And so for the humanities specifically, and for maybe even English studies, literature studies, literary and cultural studies, if you will, I have hope for it because it opens up the eyes of people to other people in a way that you've never seen. And I'm bringing it all back to Cisneros. I absolutely love this novel. But in the same way that, I read that novel and I have this immigrant experience of my own, and I start to understand other people and other people's experiences, it gives me hope for the people in the world who maybe don't see things that way, there is an ability to open one's eyes to the great beyond. This idea of having empathy for other people, it can be difficult. And, through this study, it's just so beautiful, this idea that we can learn about other people's experiences from the past, people's experiences from different places and, from different genders and sexualities and races, and get an understanding of that. And that's just so beautiful, and it gives me hope for the future of just people in general, that there is this avenue to walk down that lets you see other people and not just yourself.
Yeah, I agree. I think that people always like to quantify everything, and that's why we're facing this problem of irrelevance, because it's hard to quantify what the humanities does. Whereas with finance, with marketing, with anything in STEM, you can be like, it leads to this specific career.
There is a number I can put on
exactly.
this.
But you can't put a number on empathy. And I think that that's really what is taught in the humanities. It's like, we are culture's empathy. We are the avenue, like you said, to seeing other cultures, to seeing other walks of life, to seeing just other people's narratives. And that can't ever go away, because if that does go away, we're just robots. We just turn into a culture of robots. And I don't think that there's even an appetite for that sort of culture, because who would want that? We would have no art.
Exactly. I know. Exactly. It's the beauty that we look for in different perspectives and in different gifts, like writing and painting and music. There's so much more to the world than putting a number on something, and that's what the humanities does.
Our last question always is, what is the best book that you've read recently?
Over the break, I read LMNOP by Mark Dunn, which is funny. I was thinking about this because there's this whole thing on the internet about disrupting the LMNOP of the song. The point of this book, it takes place in a fictional island off the coast of South Carolina, and these people speak very Victorian, it's part of their culture is to preserve the complexity of language. And so they look down on the people of the world who rely on words like and really and very, and it's based around this idea of using all of the letters and all of the words that we have at our disposal. And it goes on where they start losing that, and the grappling of that change in the community, and fighting for this idea of language being something that we can use freely and not something to be policed.
That's fascinating. I'm definitely going to put that on my list.
Yes, it's by Mark Dunn.
That sounds really, really cool. Jessica Shafer, thank you for coming on the show.
I was so happy to be here.
Relevate is produced each week by Audacious Media and the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Today's episode was hosted, produced, and edited by myself, Daniel Charles Wright, and executive produced by Dr. Megan Sweeney. Special thanks to Randall Library and the excellent people at the Digital Makerspace for lending us their studio. If you have a project, a paper, or a topic that you'd like to discuss on the podcast, and you're a faculty member or a student of an accredited college or university, please send us an email at relevatepod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.